on these new terms or to come out altogether. It will be an in-out referendum. Legislation will be drafted before the next election, and if a Conservative government is elected, we will introduce the enabling legislation immediately and pass it by the end of that year, and we will complete this negotiation and hold this referendum within the first half of the next Parliament. It is time for the British people to have their say. It is time for us to settle this question about Britain and Europe. Now, I say to the British people, this will be your decision. And when the choice comes, you'll have an important choice to make about our country's destiny. Now, I understand the appeal of going it alone, of charting our own course. But it will be a decision we will have to take with cool heads. Proponents on both sides of the argument will need to avoid exaggerating their claims. Of course, Britain could make her own way in the world, outside the EU if we chose to do so. So could any other member state. But the question we'll have to ask ourselves is this: is that the very best future for our country? We will have to weigh carefully where our true national interest lies. Alone, we would be free to take our own decisions, just as we would be freed of our solemn obligation to defend our allies if we left NATO. But we don't leave NATO because it's in our national interest to stay and to benefit from its collective defence guarantee. We have more power and influence, whether implementing sanctions against Iran or Syria, or promoting democracy in Burma, if we can act together. If we leave the EU, we cannot, of course, leave Europe. It will remain for many years our biggest market and forever our geographical neighbourhood. We're tied by a complex web of legal commitments. Hundreds of thousands of British people now take for granted their right to work, to live and to retire in any other EU country. Even if we pulled out completely, decisions made in the EU would continue to have a profound effect on our country. But we would have lost all our remaining vetoes and our voice in those decisions. We would need to weigh up very carefully the consequences of no longer being inside the EU and its single market as a full member. Continued access to the single market is, as I've said, absolutely vital for British business and for British jobs. Since 2004, Britain has been the destination for 1 in 5 of all inward investments into Europe. And being part of the single market has been absolutely key to that achievement. Now, there will be plenty of time to test all the arguments thoroughly in favour and against the arrangement that we negotiate. But let me just deal with one point that we hear a lot about. There are some who suggest we could turn ourselves into Norway or Switzerland with access to the single market, but outside the EU. But would that really be in our best national interests? I admire those countries, and they're friends of ours, but they are very different to us. Norway sits on the biggest energy reserves in Europe and has a sovereign wealth fund of over 500 billion euros. And while Norway is part of the single market and pays for the principle, it has no say at all in setting its rules. It just has to implement its directives. The Swiss, they have to negotiate access to the single market sector by sector, accepting EU rules over which they have no say, or else not getting full access to the single market, including in key sectors like financial services. The fact is, if you join an organisation like the European Union, there are rules. You'll not always get what you want, but that doesn't mean that we should leave, not if the benefits of staying and working together are greater. We would also have to think carefully too about the impact on our influence at the top table of international affairs. There's no doubt that we're more powerful in Washington, in Beijing, in Delhi, because we're a powerful player inside the European Union. That matters for British jobs, for British influence, for British security. It matters to our ability to get things done in the world. It matters to the United States and other friends around the world, which is why many tell us very clearly that they want Britain to remain in the European Union. So we should think very carefully before giving that position up. If we left the European Union, it would be a one-way ticket, not a return. So we will have time for a proper, reasoned debate. And at the end of that debate, you, the British people, will decide. And I say to our European partners, frustrated as some of them no doubt are by Britain's attitude, work with us on this. Consider the extraordinary steps which the Eurozone members are taking to keep the euro together, steps which a year ago would have seemed impossible. It does not seem to me that the steps which would be needed to make Britain and others more comfortable in our relationship with the European Union are inherently so outlandish or so unreasonable. And just as I believe that Britain should want to remain in the EU, so the European Union should want us to stay. Because a European Union without Britain, without one of Europe's strongest powers, a country which in many ways invented the single market and which brings real heft to Europe's influence on the world stage, which plays by the rules, which is a force for liberal economic reform, that would be a very different kind of European Union. And it is hard to argue that the EU would not be greatly diminished by Britain's departure. Let me finish today by saying this. I have no illusions about the scale of the task ahead. I know that there will be those who will say the vision I've outlined will be impossible to achieve, that there's no way our partners will cooperate, that the British people have set themselves on a path to inevitable exits, that if we aren't comfortable being in the EU after 40 years, we never will be. But I refuse to take such a defeatist attitude, either for Britain or for Europe. Because with courage and conviction, I believe we can deliver a more flexible, adaptable and open European Union in which the interests and ambitions of all its members can be met. With courage and conviction, I believe we can achieve a new settlement in which Britain can be comfortable and all our countries can thrive. And when that referendum comes, let me say now that if we can negotiate such an arrangement, I will campaign for it with all my heart and all my soul. Because I believe something very deeply, that Britain's national interest is best served in a flexible, adaptable and open European Union. And that such a European Union is best with Britain in it. Now, over the coming weeks, months and years, I will not rest until this debate is won for the future of my country, for the success of the European Union, and for the prosperity of peoples and for generations to come. Thank you very much indeed.